I woke up in the recovery room expecting to feel groggy, sore, and ready to go home. What I did not expect was to check my phone and see 17 text messages from my neighbor, 2 voicemails, and 3 pictures of my backyard looking like someone had taken a giant eraser to it. My boundary fence, the same fence that had marked my property line for nearly 30 years, was gone, not damaged, not altered, completely removed. As I squinted at the pictures still half under the haze of anesthesia, I saw the bright orange vests of a landscaping crew, and in one image the unmistakable figure of our HOA president, arms crossed, supervising like he owned the place. That fence had been there since my late wife and I first bought the property. We set it together, post by post, sweat and laughter and little arguments about whether it was perfectly straight. Seeing it ripped out felt like someone had torn out a piece of my history. By the time my daughter drove me home, the crew was long gone. In place of my fence stood bare dirt, tire tracks, and a smug little HOA notice taped to my front door. Fence removed due to encroachment concerns. Further discussion required. Do not reinstall until approved by HOA Architectural Committee. I stood there on my porch, still in my hospital wristband, and felt a heat rise in my chest that even the pain medication couldn't numb. Encroachment. That fence had been surveyed, measured, and confirmed by the county twice. And now, suddenly while I was under anesthesia, they decided it was a problem. I called the HOA president, though I already knew how that conversation would go. He always had a way of talking down to people, like he ran a gated community in Beverly Hills instead of a modest neighborhood in rural Tennessee. Well, he started, dragging the word out like I was a child. We determined the fence was interfering with future community improvements. What improvements? I asked. That will be shared at the next board meeting, he replied, tone crisp and self-satisfied. I have a deed and surveys saying that fence was 38 inches onto my land. And we, he said, lowering his voice like he was revealing classified information, have newer measurements that show otherwise. I asked him to send them. He said he would when the board had time. Then he ended the call. The next morning, I hobbled out to the yard, still in recovery, and ran my hand along the ground where the old fence line had been. The anger that welled up in me then wasn't the childish kind, it was the steady, righteous kind. The kind that comes from decades of following rules just to have some self-appointed authority twist them whenever it suits them. My neighbor Tom walked over with a mug of coffee and shook his head. They waited till you were gone, he said. Wouldn't have dared if you were here. That decided it for me. If they wanted to play games, I knew exactly how to answer. After some digging through county records and a few phone calls, I discovered something interesting. The HOA had marked a strip along that side of my yard for a future community access path. A path that would have required moving the fence. But since they didn't own the land, they figured it'd be easier to just remove the fence while I was home and pretend it was an encroachment issue. That was their mistake. 2 days later, when the pain meds had worn off and my head was clear, I reached out to a local fencing company I'd used before. The owner, a big guy named Clay, who'd known my wife and me for years, came out with his crew. Want it back where it was? He asked. I smiled. No, I want it delivered. He raised an eyebrow, then broke into a grin. Where to? The HOA office driveway. The next morning, right at sunrise, because if they could do things underhandedly, I could be early, we loaded all the removed fence panels onto Clay's flatbed truck. Posts, rails, boards, even the old screws they'd left lying in the dirt. We drove the quarter-mile to the HOA's little office building. It wasn't anything fancy, just a converted garage with a sign in front, but it had a nice wide driveway, perfect for dropping off 30 years of lumber they had no right to touch. Clay backed the truck in as gently as a ballet dancer, then tilted the bed. The fence slid off in a perfect heap, smack in the center of the driveway. No damage, no mess. Just impossible for anyone to drive around. I left a note taped to the pile. Found your community improvement materials. They seem to belong here. The actual property owner. I was home enjoying a second cup of coffee when the HOA president called. I let it go to voicemail. His message was a masterpiece of sputtering indignation. Something about vandalism, something about board authority, and something about filing a complaint. I waited until he'd left 3 messages before calling him back. I'm just returning your call, I said sweetly. Saw you found your fence. You can't just dump things on HOA property, he snapped. Interesting, I replied, because you sure felt free to dump things on mine. Without permission, that fence was on HOA land. He insisted. Well, I said, I spoke to the county. Turns out your new measurements don't exist, but mine do. And the county surveyor will be happy to explain that at the next board meeting. There was a long silence. And by the way, I added, if you ever remove anything from my property again, the next delivery won't be just lumber. It'll be a legal complainant. It'll land harder than that pile in your driveway. He didn't have much to say after that. Over the next week, the HOA quietly reevaluated their community path plan. The boundary was restored exactly where it was supposed to be. They even sent me a letter apologizing for the miscommunication, which was their way of saying they'd been caught with their hands in the cookie jar. As for the fence on the driveway, they spent 2 full days clearing it out themselves. I didn't lift a finger. Funny thing is, ever since then, my yard has become something of a don't touch zone for the HOA. They haven't so much as placed a flyer on my door. And every time I drive past that little HOA office, I swear I can still see a faint outline of fence post impressions in the concrete dust. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe and tell me where you're watching from.